So last week I caught wind of a new movie coming out about the Blessed Virgin Mary, and I tend to have low expectations anytime Hollywood tries to take a stab at telling a story that isn't theirs to tell. So in a moment of perhaps, I don't know, excessive chivalrous sentiment, I tweeted something like, "If you're going to make a movie about my mother, there had better not be a single hair out of place." And that tweet or post or whatever it is that we're calling them now, it ended up becoming the most viral post I've ever made on Twitter or X or whatever. So there's obviously a lot of people who feel the same way, so I thought I'd spend a little more time and effort trying to discuss this a little more comprehensively. So the movie in question is simply called Mary, and before talking about the movie, I guess I'm gonna have to respond to an objection that some people, especially some people on Twitter, had, which was that in my tweet, I claimed that Mary is my mother. And the reason that I say that she is my mother is because as Christians, we hope to inherit sonship by virtue of the merits of Jesus Christ as our brother. Ephesians 1:5 says, "In love, he predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will." And in Matthew 12:50, Jesus says, "For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister." Now, if Jesus is our brother, it logically follows that Mary is our mother. But it's also worth pointing out that in ancient Israel, the queen was the mother of the king, known as the queen mother, or the Gebira. For example, in 1 Kings 2:19, Solomon honors Bathsheba by bowing down before her and providing her with a throne at his right hand, symbolizing her status as the queen. And if Jesus is the king in the kingdom of heaven, that would make his mother the Gebira, giving her a universal status as the queen mother of the whole kingdom, of which I'm assuming you and I are likely going to want to be citizens of, which honoring her as the queen mother is also likely going to be a prerequisite. Furthermore, as countless church fathers attest, Mary is the new Eve. Eve was the means by which sin came into the world, and Mary is the means through which salvation came into the world. Eve is our biological mother, from which we inherit sin, and Mary is our spiritual mother, through which we inherit salvation. Lastly, on this point, in John 19:26-27, as Jesus is slowly dying through asphyxiation, making it nearly impossible to breathe, he makes a point of using his final attempts to speak to say this to Mary and to St. John the Apostle. He says, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." Now, this isn't a case of the Bible eavesdropping on private conversations in which Jesus is making domestic provisions for his mother after he dies. This is recorded for the benefit of the church. Jesus is speaking to all of us and telling us that she is our mother and we are her sons. Like, he could have just said, "Hey, John, could you look after her after I die?" But instead, he makes a very specific point of saying she is your mother and you are her son. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at the movie. The reason that my gut reaction was one of apprehension, if not skepticism, is because promoting confusion and distortion of the Christian creed, it's a pretty routine thing for Hollywood to do. This is just one of many double standards that Christians are expected to tolerate in the society that we live in now. Like, when was the last time that Hollywood made a movie about Muhammad or Krishna or Buddha and adapted it so that those characters were either villains or they were simply mouthpieces for modern Hollywood values, or they contradicted the established creeds of those religions? I can't remember ever seeing a movie like that. But they take shots at Jesus, Mary, the apostles, and the prophets of the Old Testament all the time. I don't get why non-Christians are so obsessed with distorting the narrative of a religion that is not their own, unless it's because they're threatened by it. Not only are non-Christians constantly trying to spread confusion about what Christianity is all about, but it's also worth mentioning that Christians never make movies about other religious figures with those same motives. Christians might discuss other religions insofar as they intersect with our own beliefs, but if we were to make movies, we'd make them about our own story. That's the story that we're excited to and maybe have a right to tell. You'll never see studios like PureFlix Entertainment make a movie about Muhammad in order to frame him in a way that is contrary to Muslim doctrine, or a movie about Buddha trying to make it look like he was an entirely different person from what Buddhist tradition has come to believe. But non-Christians, they do this all the time with the Christian story. They're obstinate in making films that portray characters or stories from the Bible in terms that are contrary to biblical and church tradition. Movies like The Last Temptation of Christ, Noah, Exodus, Gods and Kings, The Da Vinci Code, Mother, and Godspell are just some pretty obvious examples of what I'm talking about here. So is this new movie about Mary just another film to be added to that same genre? Based on the trailer, I don't know, I'd say it's hard to say, but there are definitely some red flags I'd be willing to highlight here. The first thing I noticed was the opening line in which she says, "I don't know why, but I was chosen for this." This might be pretty innocuous, but I don't know, it bothered me for some reason. It suggests that she is both confused and in the dark, but resolute and determined nonetheless. But God didn't simply impose this design and his will on her without offering an explanation and an invitation. The angel Gabriel appeared to her and explained what was going on, that she was full of grace and had found favor with God, a favor that would make it possible for her to bear a son who would inherit the throne of David. She responds by asking how that's possible since she is a virgin, and St. Gabriel explains it will be by a miracle of the Holy Spirit. She then freely responds to the invitation in submission to the will of God and says, "Let it be done to me according to your word," meaning she understands what has been communicated and is a willing collaborator in God's plan. Then if you read what she says in the Magnificat when she greets her cousin Elizabeth, she monologues one of the most beautiful expositions about the work that God is doing and the profoundness of his plan of salvation. This isn't some confused little girl. This is someone who clearly understands the mind of God at work in the world and recognizes her role within it. The next thing I noticed was wardrobe. Women in ancient Israel, especially avowed virgins, would prioritize modesty in their clothing choices above all else. And this would have included a veil to cover her hair. But in most of the shots I saw in the trailer, even when she was sort of wearing a veil, her hair was conspicuous. And I know people are going to get annoyed that I'm hung up on this detail, but in an age when modesty is the absolute last priority in the way that both men and women dress, I think it would be a good thing to emphasize this Christian virtue, which has been lost even among, and especially among, Christians. Loose clothing and veils were a standard way of honoring God and each other in that time. Today's standard is so far removed from that we can't even tolerate depicting it accurately in a movie about the very exemplar of modesty and chastity. That seems like a seriously missed opportunity to me. Now, I also know that some people will take exception to me saying that she was an avowed virgin, meaning she took a vow to remain celibate. Of course, most Protestants aren't going to like that, but consider the fact that the Bible, in introducing her in the Gospel of Luke, right before St. Gabriel appears to her, calls her a virgin multiple times. And this hardly needs to be said because by default, unless someone was infamous for their unchastity, it was presumed they were a virgin before they were married. It doesn't need to be said here unless it's because she had a unique status as a virgin who took a vow. And furthermore, this is a consistent teaching of church fathers and doctors. Nobody up until after the Protestant Reformation believed otherwise. St. Augustine said Mary had already vowed her virginity to God when the angel Gabriel came to her, and she wondered how she could be a mother without violating her vow. St. Ambrose, another church father, said Mary's virginity was not taken from her by necessity, but offered by her own vow. She preferred virginity to what is of the flesh. St. Gregory of Nyssa, again another church father, said, "It was fitting that the one who was chosen to bring forth the Lord of all purity should herself be purified and consecrated to God, living a life of virginity." And honestly, I could go on and on. This is the unanimous and universal belief of all Christians until Protestants broke with that tradition, because they won't admit that the word brother in scripture can denote extended family like cousin. The last thing I wanted to highlight as a red flag was that in the trailer it depicts her experiencing labor pains, which is a view that would place the producers in a very small minority against the Christian tradition. Labor pains were a direct consequence that God imposes after the sin of Eve, but Mary, the new Eve, was sinless and therefore likely wouldn't have experienced that consequence. In the prophecy of the book of Isaiah about the birth of Jesus in chapter 66, verse 22, which is a verse that many church fathers cite to make this argument, it says, "Before she was in labor, she gave birth before her pain came upon her, as she was delivered of a son." And the church has taught this magisterially. The Catechism of the Council of Trent says, "For preserving her virginal integrity inviolate, she brought forth Jesus without experiencing, as we have already said, any sense of pain." And Pope Alexander III taught that Mary indeed conceived without shame and gave birth without pain. Now, with all of that said, there were some promising things in the trailer. One thing that stood out to me was that she appears to be wearing a uniform at one point, along with many other girls walking in formation and praying together and working or sewing on some kind of a fabric. This, to me, suggests it could be a portrayal of the temple virgins who would weave the temple veil. So portraying her in this way is, I don't know, it's a pretty cool inclusion and something that was commonly taught in the early church. I also noticed that the director is apparently Catholic who consulted with a bishop for theological direction, so maybe it will be better than I expect. But so what, some might say? Why do we have to fuss so much about accuracy? Why can't we just enjoy a fun movie about biblical stories? And I would say, I can't emphasize this enough. Like, I don't know why I sometimes feel like I'm in the minority when I say this, but movies about stories in the Bible should be instructive and therefore biblically and theologically accurate. If they're not, and we're okay with that, then we're admitting that the spread of confusion about our faith is a price worth paying in exchange for mere entertainment. I don't know, that shows a serious confusion about our priorities. This is how we get people that choose their church, not based on the accuracy of its teaching, but on how amusing the stage production is. It's like saying, as long as the sermon was amusing and entertaining to me, I don't really care if it's theologically sound. Your religion doesn't exist to entertain you. That has nothing to do with its purpose. And in fact, if it didn't entertain you in the least, that wouldn't in any way impugn it as a religion. But if you insist that it does entertain you and you make that like a high priority, you're going to find yourself following false doctrines and then in the company of the blind and the confused. And the power of visual cinema and how it shapes our perception and recollection of details shouldn't be underestimated. I've had conversations and even debates with people about our faith in which they resorted to appealing to scenes from the life of Jesus that never happened because they saw it in shows like The Chosen and were convinced it was in the Bible when in fact it wasn't. Another good example from my own experience is The Lord of the Rings. I've seen the movies and I've also read those books, but it's probably been, I don't know, probably like 15 years since I read the books. And as my memory fades on both the movies and the books, wherever there are inconsistencies between the two, it's my memory of the movies that always overshadows my memory of the books. And I've heard lots of people say that The Chosen helped them take an interest in reading the Bible, even though producers of The Chosen have specifically said that they aren't focusing on biblical accuracy. A lot of what's in that show is just made up based on how they feel Jesus might have acted in scenarios that they concocted for him. But I get that people claim this, but I honestly don't understand it. It's a pretty strange logical correlation to make. It's like saying that interesting lies made me want to learn about the truth. Like, what if someone said that about their spouse? Like, I wasn't interested in her until someone told me a bunch of fake stories about her that weren't true, and then I got really attracted to her based on those stories. It's like, what? Why would that make you attracted to her? So I don't know, hopefully this movie will be better than what the trailer portrays. But if nothing else, I think it should be a reminder for us as Christians not to treat our religion like just one more source of amusement, as if our lives aren't saturated enough in idle distractions and entertainment. We should be resolute in insisting that if someone is going to tell the story of salvation from any angle, accuracy and instruction should be the top priority, not entertainment. Can I ask you to stick around for one extra minute? Because if you enjoyed that, well, first of all, thanks for watching. But now I could really benefit from your help, which you can do in a couple of ways. You can check out my sponsor, Real Estate for Life, who is a network of pro-family real estate agents that can connect you with one in your area. So if you're looking to buy a home, check them out at realestateforlife.org. And if you can help out directly financially, I tend to trust that most of my regular viewers can afford to drop a $5 tip in my jar once a year. And if they did, I wouldn't have to worry about the financial viability of this effort. So if you do want to support, you can go to brianholdsworth.ca/support or join me in my locals community to get exclusive content and chances to interact with me and members of the like-minded community at brianholdsworth.locals.com.